Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and even good night. Welcome to the second of our advocacy training sessions during the 16 days of activism. You are here with us at the World Council of Churches, and we are so thankful that you deemed this important enough to make this a part of your day. With us today is a host of facilitators coming from around the world. We have facilitators from Africa, Asia, the Middle East, the Caribbean, already USA, already and rearing to share from their wealth of experience and expertise with you all. Unfortunately, our senior leadership staff are away at the executive committee meetings and they're unable to join us and have shared their apologies. However, Athena Peralta, the Director of Climate Justice, the Commission for Climate Justice and Sustainable Development, is here with us and will bring us greetings and welcome. For those of you who are in the audience, we ask that you mute your mics and communicate with us via chat. Athena, hello, welcome again.
Hello again, Nikki, and a very, very, very warm welcome to all of you who are joining this online advocacy training program. I bring greetings on behalf of the World Council of Churches leadership. We know that churches have important responsibilities, pastoral and diaconal responsibilities, but ours also is the prophetic task of bearing witness and speaking truth to power, but not just speaking truth to power, but also bringing the perspective of those who are vulnerable, those who are on the underside of history, those who reside in the socioeconomic margins of our world. For the World Council of Churches, advocacy has always been a vital part of churches' engagement in the world. The WCC, for instance, contributed to the development of the United Nations Universal Declaration on Human Rights. So that was definitely more than 50 years ago. And this engagement, this prophetic engagement has become even more important in a time of global climate change, which, as we all know, is causing tremendous suffering in many, many parts of the world, but especially on income poor and climate vulnerable nations, as well as sectors of society, such as women, children, youth, indigenous peoples, and persons living with disabilities. From the very, very beginning, the WCC has participated in the United Nations climate conferences, bringing a moral and ethical perspective. And we were also at the recently concluded COP29 that took place in Baku, Azerbaijan. As churches, we should not downplay our role. There is this powerful quote from Gus Speth, the founder of the World Resources Institute, and he said, I used to think that the top environmental problems were biodiversity loss, ecosystems collapse, and climate change. And I thought that with 30 years of good science, we could address those problems, but I was wrong. The top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And to deal with those, we need a spiritual and cultural transformation. And so this is just really to underline the role that churches can play in advocacy. So at the heart of our advocacy work is the understanding that justice is the foundation of God's plan for people and planet. And through this training program, we hope that we can exchange and learn from each other on how to really better advocate for a world that is fair and a world that is sustainable. So again, A warm welcome. And already in advance, I'd like to thank all of those who are contributing to this training program, for our wonderful facilitators, for offering their time, their wisdom, and their experience. And so we look forward to a really exciting and enriching training. Back to you, Nikki.
Thank you, Athena. So, welcome once again. And as Walter has indicated in the chat, we invite you to give us a name, location, so we have an idea of who it is that we have joining us this day, whatever time of day it is for you. Let us pause as we go to God in prayer. Creating, loving, giving, advocating God. You have always said that you have a special place in your heart for those whom we would often seek to ignore. We seek in this training to lift them up, to raise their voices, to amplify the impact of what life could be if we were to but listen. Teach us how to speak. Teach us how to be a voice crying in the wilderness. Teach us how to be the agents of change and transformation that this world needs at this time. So, welcome in our midst. Be with the facilitators, be with the tech team, be with myself, and be with every single one of us gathered here as audience and learners. May the teaching learning experience be such that it has a ripple effect way into the rest of the world. Guide our proceedings even now, we pray. In the name of Yeshua. Amen. Siblings, it is my pleasure to invite the Reverend Patricia Sheraton Bisnath to lead us in a conversation, a reflection, a learning on what is advocacy. Reverend Pat, welcome. Over to you.
Okay. 1 minute. Let me just get my hello, everyone. Good morning. Good day. Greetings, everybody. In the meanwhile, let me say greetings, everyone. Greetings, joining you from Guyana. And it's a blessing to be here with all of you. I see a lot of familiar faces, friends, all. I appreciate this work by this very important work by the World Council of Churches. And indeed, I pray that our blessings will be multiplied as we seek to be a witness in today's troubled world, yet a world full of hope. So my presentation here on advocacy, and I know that our church is at the forefront and actually, in many cases, first responder to crisis and to needs of people and communities within their community and beyond in the wider society. And I've entitled my presentation, "The Spirit Groans, Still I Dance." So as we begin this work together on advocacy, I'd like for us to think about what is the connection between the kingdom of God and the mission of the church. What do you think is the role of the church in society? Or rather, what's your experience and your work as church leaders of the church's role in society? What activities should a church be involved in and possibly not? Who has power and influence in your society? Where, in all of this, where is the church located? What is the level of the church's engagement in the public sphere? Hope in action. We're going to talk about advocacy as hope in action. Christian communities as agents of advocacy. So advocacy is an act of radical hope, a declaration of our unwavering belief in the possibility of a just and flourishing world. It is a sacred endeavor deeply rooted in the promise that God's purposes are unfolding in our midst, even amidst the trials and tribulations of our times. We advocate not out of bitterness or a thirst for vengeance, but with a forward-looking faith that justice will prevail. This work is a reflection of our divine calling to be salt and light, preserving what is good, illuminating what is true, and confronting what is unjust. In every act of advocacy, we stand as witnesses to God's transformative power, bearing the torch of love and truth in a world yearning for redemption. Together, we embody the prophetic vision of justice rolling down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. So what is advocacy? Let's go to the basics of an introduction to advocacy. Advocacy is the act of speaking, supporting and defending a cause, or pleading on behalf of others. It seeks to ensure that all people in society are able to have their voices heard on issues that are important to them and to protect and promote their rights, to have their views and needs genuinely considered when decisions are being made about their lives, especially in those places of influence and power. And let us be reminded of there are many texts across the Bible that speak and teach us about advocacy. Micah 6, Proverbs 31, Amos 5. He has told you, O mortal, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you but to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God, to speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, ensure justice for those being crushed. Yes, speak up for the poor and helpless and see that they get justice. And let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. So the prophetic role in speaking out against injustices, let us think about this role that we are called to play wherever we are located and worldwide. The prophetic role is a sacred calling, a fearless commitment to speak out against the injustices that plague our society, our communities, and plague the world. It demands a profound connection with those who are suffering, to feel their pain as our own and stand in solidarity with their struggles. In this role, we are guided by prayer, seeking God's wisdom and grace to illuminate the path forward toward justice, peace, and restoration. It is a journey that requires both courage and compassion as we amplify the cries for justice and advocate for those whose voices are often silenced. And fulfilling the call is to influence those in power, to challenge systems of oppression and dismantle structures of inequality, to build alliances rooted in love and collaboration, uniting diverse voices in a shared pursuit of righteousness. It calls us to speak truth to power, boldly, unapologetically, calling leaders and institutions to account for their actions and urging them to embrace the transformative work of justice. It is not only a mission, it is a movement of faith, a testament to the power of moral clarity and divine purpose in a world yearning for healing and hope. Advocacy is love in action. It is prayer and action. Advocacy is love in action, truth in motion, and hope embodied. It calls us to confront the forces of indifference with courage, to speak truth to power with conviction, and to labor tirelessly for a world that reflects the beauty and glory of a just creation. Advocacy is not only an action, it is a declaration of unwavering solidarity with the vulnerable and marginalized and those who are oppressed and downpressed, those who are discriminated against on a daily basis. The call to advocate is a profound commitment to the vision of a restored world, a world where justice reigns and righteousness flows like a mighty stream. It is a call to advocate. To advocate is to educate minds and stir hearts, to raise awareness of injustices that scar our body. It's a call to listen deeply with our hearts. It is to influence public policies with boldness, insisting that the structures of power serve the cause of equity and dignity. It is to join hands in alliances, building bridges across differences and amplifying the collective voice of those who dare to dream of a better tomorrow, to examine in our own communities, the environment in which we live and thrive, or where we are hidden and where we are falling into the pits of darkness, and injustices. It's to examine that environment. Is it an enabling environment? Where is the church in terms of demanding that the environment be one where all can thrive, all can be nurtured, all can be part of a flourishing community? And yes, it is to take to the streets and marketplaces where cries for justice are loudest and need for change is more urgent. And as I said earlier, often the church is the first responder to those who are in need. When our people are suffering, when there's violence in the home, when someone suffers an injustice, when society, is in chaos time and time again, when there's conflict and war. And so, friends, whilst we do a great job and a much needed job with humanitarian needs, while charitable and development programs bring help, a lot of times it's a short-term but very crucial and necessary help to those in need. Sometimes they do not always get to the root causes of the problem that can be perpetual. So advocacy enables us to go deeper into the root causes of the issues and pushes for changes in law, in policies, in practices, and it creates a shift in the landscape of our society towards greater justice, towards human rights, and towards a flourishing community. And here I saw this lovely diagram taken from Arigato International. When I saw this, I said, yes, this is faith in action. It gives us a picture. And I got this verse from Matthew 31:40. Truly, I tell you, just as you did it to one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did it unto me. So it's engagement, which is linked to how we take a stand and act. It is prayer. We pray as persons, as individuals, but we come together collectively in our families, in our wider families, in our church community, and with people of other faith in an interfaith gathering for prayer. We raise awareness on issues. What we are doing is really not only connecting with the cries of people, but building a whole connection, across our community and society and the world. And we move forward like WCC is doing here in building capacity, in creating a platform for, building up that mobilization to look at in our own societies, what are the policy developments where there is need to lobby that there would be policies to protect and to build up and to get rid of those that tear down and cast aside people. And also for research and evidence building. What is happening? What have we gathered, from development so far? And so some key steps, that I'd like to share with you, and I'm sure you have others to add and can speak a lot to this. Establish common discourse and linkages with existing groups and coalitions, because there are many who are doing work in advocacy. We are in the period of the 16 days of activism to end violence against women and children, and there are many groups across society. We don't have to work. It is a much stronger and bolder move to build those kinds of common discourse and coalitions. Mobilize community networks, gatekeepers, and other influencers to participate in and to support with implementing activities together, among communities that we identify, to engage in cooperation and support of such groups as civil society organizations, whether they be women's rights groups, youth groups, indigenous peoples, those representing people, vulnerable populations, in order to facilitate community dialogue with members of different vulnerable groups, as I mentioned, such as women, girls, persons with disabilities, migrants, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, intersex, and queer plus persons. And some foundations for advocacy. One, theological grounding. We need to continuously, do our theological grounding with each other, and so frame advocacy within scriptural teachings about justice, compassion, and human dignity, to which every citizen in this world, is given that right by God to live with respect and human dignity. Emphasize the church's role as a moral compass and refuge for those in need. And how do we do that? We do that from the pulpit, and we do that in our faithful living and our witnessing. And the mission of our church communities. Awareness campaigns are very important. Organize, sessions, workshops, conversations on the root causes, for instance, of gender-based violence. People are doing a lot of that in these 16 days. Its impact and the role on families, on individuals, and in the church. use, and there's a lot of social media now. I mean, we really have to get with it in terms of where we find them, where they can engage and interact, where they can educate and inform us, because it's not just us, imparting information. We are also receiving and learning and growing with the people that we work with. Training our pastors and leaders, and ensure that it's a broad-based training. Sunday school teachers, children, conduct seminars on recognizing signs of abuse, responding compassionately, referring survivors to professional services, developing sermon guides, and addressing family violence and promoting gender justice. Encourage churches to adopt policies that safeguard against harassment and abuse within church settings, create safe spaces for women and children to report abuse confidentially. Yesterday, I was in a meeting with our Ministry of Governance here, where we are preparing our universal UPR periodic report, and they called on myself and other church leaders. So what are the churches, to report on what we are doing? It was a rather interesting, session. Community outreach. Many are organizing days of activism, as I said, and congregations are engaged in marches, vigils, and panel discussion. Here in the Caribbean, where we have a new ecumenical group in the Making Caribbean Religious Voices for Action, we are sharing video 1, 2, 3-minute video messages across, our region, and hoping to reach, wide communities to really engage with us in dialogue. Partner with local organizations to provide resources such as shelters, counseling, and legal aid. And in many places, churches are also, doing and providing these kinds of essential support. Host Bible study sessions, focus on themes of justice and equality, facilitate youth programs, and challenge toxic masculinity, and promoting respectful relationships. Hosting ecumenical services, interfaith dialogues to amplify the message against whatever it is. I thought I will do GBV, since we are in the 16 days. Write open letters or statements to policymakers, urging implementation of survivor-centered policies. And of course, it means that we need to get these policies. We also need to examine our churches to see, do we have these policies? Are we really living and witnessing, as a model for our society following Jesus Christ? Collaboration with organizations, partner with women and children's rights groups and advocacy organizations to strengthen collective impact. Use church platforms to amplify voices of survivors and advocates. And here is where, very, very important, because we know that without the involvement of faith communities, I work both with the Christian community. I'm involved in a lot of interfaith work, but my paid job is with civil society. And I will say it is recognized that the most influential really is the faith communities. And so we need to be there and to step up really to elevate our work. Feedback mechanism. So we need feedback, for congregations to tell us and to show us. We need to monitor, the implementation. My church in 2015 passed a sexual misconduct policy. And when you pass such a policy like that, it means there's a wide level of education, and it builds awareness, it builds conversation. And so that in itself, is a really great stepping stone towards advocacy, that our people in the communities can rise up and speak in a powerful way. Incorporate advocacy in the annual church calendar, make sure that it's there, it's part, of our mission, train leaders and volunteers to ensure long-term commitment to this cause. And key messages. Ending gender-based violence is not just a legal issue. Yesterday we discussed that Guyana has, great laws, great gender equality laws, and we're happy for that. But so much needs to be done in terms of people actually benefiting from these laws. Because without the laws, without people benefiting and without an implementation mechanism, and without the involvement of all in society, including faith communities, these laws remain like toothless and without feet. So we understand also that the church is, critical, is a critical player in all of this because it's a moral and spiritual mandate, within the society. And we are recognized for this and called upon to do this. So together we can create a just world and a world where justice and compassion prevail over violence and oppression. And we know that the church is a sanctuary for many, and no one should suffer in silence. The advocacy plan invites churches to take bold, meaningful steps in addressing so many issues of violence against children. One of the issues, I don't know what it's like for you, but it's we had quite a robust discussion on was corporal punishment, about beating children as the main way of discipline. And so far, the church, the Christian community is really very much at the forefront of insisting that it must remain, because without beating the children, this kind of violence, it is violence. Without that, the children will not grow up in the straight and narrow path. I just leave that right here for you to think about. By combining faith with action, churches can lead the way in creating safe, inclusive, and equitable communities. Here I share a bit of that we did in the Guyana Council of Churches. Here is the Roman Catholic bishop and several denominations. Actually, not only the Guyana Council of Churches, we invited the interreligious organization. Here we have a Hindu pundit, and we there was a lot of chaos in Parliament that we saw as vulgar. And so we took this reach, we marched and we went to Parliament, in a protest against what's happening. So that's one of the ways that we can say, here we are, and that we speak powerfully. And we were speaking powerfully in Parliament, in silence that day. And I'll just share with you two inspirational stories that started with women and started in churches. Lema Kobwe, I'm sorry, I may be mispronouncing, from Liberia. Many of you may know, that that mass action for peace to end the civil war, where Lema Kobwe, a mother of 5, it began in church. She led women from her church to pray for peace. And she was successful in then multiplying this, recruiting several hundred to protest the war and uniting not only congregations, I think Lutheran Church, not so sure, but I think it is, and with other denominations, leading to a mass movement, building up prayer groups, and the prayer groups coming together and multiplying and amplifying, these prayers, the dialogues, and creating spaces for healing circles. And then building alliance with the Muslim women. And in one instance, a Muslim policeman, she came to a service in a Christian congregation, and she stood up and she said that, please, we are all serving the same God. We need to come together for our people. We need to stop the killing. We need peace. We must have peace. And so together they led one united movement, the Women of Liberia Mass Action for Peace, a resounding message, ringing clear. And they were saying this on the street, kind of Bullet pick one of us. I mean, they all came together. Does Bullet know, Christian and Muslim? So here we know that when we unite and form alliances, a lot of things can happen. And so, friends, in the Bible, and we'll hear a lot more about that. There's so many stories of those who led protests, Esther, Nehemiah, Moses. Remember the persistent widow in Luke 18? Philemon. And so we look forward to the rest of this session, and I pray God's blessings upon all of us. And again, thank Nikki and the WCC and all organizers and all those who are joining us as participants and all those who will lead session. Thank you very much.
Wow, 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 wow. Reverend Pat, you never, ever, ever disappoint. I don't know why my video, there you go. I don't know why my video is misbehaving today, but I'm back now. I thank you so much. You have given us a lot to chew on. And for those of you who are asking, yes, the videos, the videos also, but the PowerPoint will be made available at a later point for you to process as is needed. We can't just let all of that good food go. So let's allow Reverend Pat to have a swallow and all. And then I invite you to use the feature in the Zoom, which allows you to raise hands, because I'm sure there are a question or five or two in the chat. Is there anyone who wants to ask a question? So we understood everything, or we're still chewing a little bit? Were there any questions in the chat? I didn't recall seeing any. I saw Jennifer's comment about the misusing of the terminology. So Reverend Rebecca, followed by Comfort, in that order. Reverend Rebecca, welcome. Reverend Rebecca Fokelston. Okay, maybe not. How about Comfort Atuanwu?
All right, thank you. Comfort is here. I'm from Nigeria, in fact, from the Women Wing Christian Council of Nigeria. I just want to say that it is just like a wow, wow, wow. I'm so excited with this presentation, honestly. It has covered the whole lot of this advocacy issue we have been talking about. But I would like Reverend Pat to throw more light on the aspect of monitoring and sustainability. What are the mechanisms for the feedback? I'm not quite very clear on that. How do we get the feedback? I'm talking on monitoring and sustainability. She talked about feedback mechanism and sustained commitment and so on and so forth. Can she throw more light on that, please, if it is possible? Thank you.
Reverend Pat, whenever you're ready. Especially after you unmute.
Sorry, I'm sorry. Yeah, got it. I was going for it in my slide, but let me just, that's okay. That's fine. Perfectly fine. Everybody, okay. So it's important that when we are, you know, we have our plan, we have our concept, we have our plan, and that we will then um, begin to work. And it's very important that when we are planning the activities, that those we are aiming for, that they are also involved in this planning. So it becomes relevant so that, you know, it's owned by them. And monitoring now is a very important part of that process because monitoring the activities would enable you to have, you know, the feedback. So any kind of feedback, it can be feedback by, you know, focus groups. And when we're doing monitoring, we also have to be sensitive to how people speak when they're giving feedback or sharing their experiences. Um, Sometimes they don't do this well with everyone. Say in the case of we're doing work with survivors of gender-based violence, we then have to know what spaces that they are safe spaces that are created. And those then will enable us to know where, you know, we are going, how does this work, how did this not work, and we then would take that into consideration for future program, or see if this program needs to, you know, to be further developed. And so it helps with, you know, sustainability in relation to long-term goals, such as ending violence against, I wish it is just a short term, but this has been going on forever and it's a long-term goal. So my sister Comfort, thank you very much. And these are steps which need to be taken, the activity, and then to get all kinds of, you know, feedback. Some people do a survey, some people talk with people, some people, you know, do several ways, and it has to be also culturally sensitive to get that kind of feedback.
Thank you so very much, Reverend Pat. So, Reverend Rebecca, if you still have a question, we welcome you to speak. Please unmute.
Hi, thank you for the great presentation. So I have two questions. So I think it's easy to think about advocacy as something outside the community. So I wanted to think like inside the community and also in spaces where people are in power. We often say speaking truth to power, but I was thinking about speaking through among us in power. Can you elaborate a little bit your thoughts about that? And also, another question is advocacy in spaces and countries where you don't have legislation, because some elaborated a little bit of your thoughts about that.
Can you repeat the last bit, please?
Advocacy in
Yes.
spaces where the legislation is not in place.
Okay, thank you for that. Yes, so speaking the truth in power, yes, that's very interesting and good that you raised that. um you know, as people with tremendous influence, that is those of us, you know, in the church, when we are speaking, you know, our words and action, they are very much, you know, they make an impact, and, you know, various kinds of impact. It could be positive, it could be negative. could lead to light or lead to darkness. So speaking the truth, you said in power, right? Am I correct if I understand the first question?
Yeah, among us in power. Because often, yeah.
Yeah. Yes, because often, you know, we speak to others. This is a really great question on this platform today. And how are we doing this? A lot of times, you know, well, diplomats, you know, they have language to cushion or to put a screen in terms of what they want to say. As people from the churches, but from within that community, we tend not to be forthcoming. And this is one of the things I think, you know, we all, I have examples that are not great to share, but among us here gathered, we may have better examples of how this is happening in the churches because, you know, we kind of massage each other and we find it difficult to speak the truth in power because we don't want to be, because it can be a disruptive force, you know, within our community and where that could land and the implications. So we need to do this, and I would love to hear some examples of where this is happening and how it is happening. Where there is no legislation that's critical to address, you know, what people are going through, the pain and hurt of people, especially vulnerable people, then what we have to do, we know there's no legislation. We need to get together with other advocacy groups, first of all, with these people to understand better, because we have to be reading our own society, our environment. We understand why there's no, it could be various reasons why there's none, but then we can actually begin lobbying for this legislation that together, like I show a march to Parliament, we begin to develop those skills to engage with those in those corridors of power in the cabinet of the government, in the Parliament, where we ensure that we are working with them. I was going to use the word push. We can't push. Yes, we can push also, but where we are also working and supporting the drafting of such critical bills to be passed in our parliament. We also need to do the education with our people in the churches and let that multiply, such as the peace movement in Liberia.
Thank you, Reverend Pat. So I am going to ask Malebo, sorry. Yes, Malebo Lepinka, and then Toby to follow with their questions, and OWDC PK to
Yeah,
Malebo,
good evening.
This is Malebo.
Good evening,
Malebo.
all of you.
OWDC, can you wait, please, dear? It's Malebo, followed by Toby, followed by OWDC, in that order.
Yes, I
Thank you.
am
Thank you
Hanif
very
Lal
much, and
from
good afternoon.
Pakistan.
Hold on.
Hanif Lal from
Malebo, please.
Good afternoon, and thank you very much to the organizers, and thank you very much, Reverend Patricia, for the great and inspiring presentation. My concern and or comment is it's always great to have good policy as shelf documents. How do we ensure that implementation, efficiency, monitoring, and evaluation is done while maintaining and creating a safe space for the survivors? How do we actually ensure implementation, efficiency, effectiveness, monitoring, and evaluation whilst ensuring safety space for the survivors? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Malebo. Toby?
Thank you very much for that wonderful presentation. My question is more of a practical question, and I think I'll put it this way: in the pursuit of religious institutions such as the church, to balance their own pursuit of reconciliation and accountability, how do we do that, balancing that with justice as well, with support and safety of GBV survivors within the space of the church environment? So I often find this question quite essential because I want to see if perhaps the answer lies not in what is the answer, but if there are practical examples you can give that addresses this potential tension between the church's role in fostering forgiveness and healing, but also its responsibility to ensure that justice and protection is warranted for those who have experienced harm within the church spaces and maybe even outside of the church spaces. Thank you.
Thank you, Toby. OWDC, it's your turn now.
Thank you very much, Patricia. It is a very good presentation about the advocacy. So I am Hanif Lal from Pakistan. So my concern is this, that the church institutions, church leaders are not very much aware about the term of advocacy. They are just praying and performing their religious activities. They are not involved in do not have any right-based approach, and they need to teach them about the right-based approach. Therefore, they can advocate for their communities in Pakistan. So this is my small concern, and there are some problem with the net connection. So I request to you, please, if it is possible, email your presentation. I want to study this presentation thoroughly, and then I will email to you about the Pakistani context. So we Christian in Pakistan facing a lot of discrimination, persecution on the basis of religion, faith. So please post me, email me
We'll share all the
if it
training
is
material
possible.
with you. We will share all the training material with you. Two last questions, and then we will have to wrap up because Reverend Pat needs to answer before we move into the other session. Miana Jacobs, Bismarck Asante, and then Reverend Pat, you have the joy of condensing the answers to these questions.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for Reverend Patricia for the wonderful presentation. My question I would like to ask, because a few years back, there was an incident within newspaper whereby the couple killed, the couple fight on a weekly basis or whenever they get paid and so on, and then they will fight. And then the male will usually must now beat up the woman and so on. But the community members is now around, they're calling the police. When the police come, and then the same wife is the person who's gonna yell at the police at why they are coming, and this is her husband. Her husband is not going anywhere to jail and so on. So my question is, how do you help such a person that doesn't want to be helped or assisted? Thank you very much.
Bismarck Asante, and then that's it for questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Patricia, for the insightful presentation. My question and probably concern, it's when you made mention of doing biblical reflections of our engagement in advocacy. And my concern is it possible that the churches have pulpits, they have people sitting in front of them? Is it possible to include within their liturgies issues of advocating for things that affect injustices, especially gender-based violence, through their liturgies, so that it's included within what the church does and what the congregants hear from the pulpit? So is that possible? Thank you.
Over to you, Reverend Pat.
Okay, well, thanks for those, great questions, and I think that this will have to move to some more work, Reverend Nikki. So, ensuring, implementation efficiency, monitoring, evaluation, and at the same time, I mean, how do we do that effectively? Ensuring safety of survivors. Well, this needs to be, of course, carefully done, and we need, sometimes we need some help to ensure that we get this. This is how it must be done, or else don't do it. It's very, very important, and many there are many examples, and I will ask Reverend Nikki. I mean, I can help to get some of these examples, but sharing them, across our church community, I think could be a powerful thing. But this is doable and it is being done. I know for sure. So we have some practices. Balancing, fostering forgiveness and healing. I'm so happy for this question. Because this is where, from our spiritual wellspring as such, um, we know that healing is important, but healing needs to be linked with justice, because without justice, there really cannot be, healing and forgiveness. So it is important. I go in my church, we pass this policy on sexual misconduct for ministers, leaders, anyone working with the church. It's one example, where we build in there justice and healing and a process, because our interest is to work towards mending brokenness and restoring wholeness. Again, there are several examples of this, being done, but it's one to ensure that we take into consideration in our work, even as pastors and counselors, that these important areas are brought in there. And I would say that I do understand. I visited Pakistan. I was once on a WCC mission to Pakistan, and I know the dire situation in Pakistan. Yes, and my prayers are with you, and pray that God will strengthen your work, that all people can really live peacefully, and all their rights, being given, and discrimination can be eroded. So I think that there needs to be more support at the global level, but support at the regional and local level. Our work is undone if we are not connecting with each other, if our churches are not connecting with the cries of our brothers and sisters in Pakistan. And so I think we need um, to strengthen those connections so that their voices can be amplified. When we visited Pakistan, we visited the churches, but we also met with the UNHCR commissioner there, and then in Geneva, ensuring that there were council of churches, you have a seat, you have a presence, you have a voice, and through these channels, we hope at one level, which is an important level, yes, to raise our voices. And at the level of the people, it's important in terms of mending those relationships and, destigmatization of people. So that is an ongoing work. I think we need to press our own ecumenical bodies for strengthened work in those areas. And with the story that was told, yes, I was sharing a story yesterday about a woman who um didn't want to go to the police, and and we have to understand people. We can't push them where they're not prepared at that moment to go, especially people with trauma, people in pain. We need to listen. We need to listen to them in the first place. They need to know that we see them. I mean, seeing them is seeing with our hearts, and that we're listening and that we are there for them. And this is so, so important that we do this training in our church among, all the deacons and elders and groups, working in the church, that we put at the center the people who need us, and the pain. And we also bear pain. So where do we take that? We are looking for safe spaces too, as pastors and as leaders. And sometimes, sometimes the church is the last place you want to go for that, right? I leave that as a question for all of us, because we need to look inside someone's ear and speaking truth within. Also, in terms of, are we there for each other?
Thank you so much, Reverend Pat.
Thank
For
you
the
so
last
much.
question, Bismarck, we are actually about to go into our breakout rooms, where opportunities to hear more on preaching, worship, liturgical expression, and/or Bible study will be made available to us. Reverend Pat, as you can see, the conversation just keeps on going. You have given us a lot to chew, and even in the Q&A, you have given us a lot to think about. Thank you so much for making the time all the way from Guyana to join us, and we look forward to other opportunities where you will be able to share with us from your vast experience. We promised, and we are here to deliver. Colleagues, we have 3 esteemed facilitators for the next session. Unfortunately, you cannot be at all 3 cohorts. So, when you signed up, you had selected worship, in particular worship preparation, Bible study, or preaching. How do we do advocacy through these spaces? And we've already seen that that question is beginning to surface, because we want to impact our communities. When the breakout room option is opened, we invite you to select the breakout room of your first choice. When you get in the room, once you've had about a minute or so to settle down, then the facilitators will ensure that the recording is set in motion, and we will try as best as possible to have the breakout sessions recorded so that you will be able to hear what took place in the other spaces. Again, the options are worship, Bible study, preaching. You are to select one breakout room. And at this point, I invite you to do exactly that. Thank you once again, Reverend Pat and Reverend Stacy, Reverend Colin, and Reverend Lydia. We look forward to joining you in the breakout spaces. I tell you, we had a very good time together with Reverend Stacy in our preparation for worship, and I can only begin to imagine what preaching and Bible study looks like. Thank you so very much, Reverend Stacy, and we hope that just in case we had issues with the recording, that you would be able to record and share with us, and to remind folk that all the presentations will be shared with you at a later point. Welcome back, Reverend Lydia. Welcome back, Reverend Dr. Colin. It is so good to have you back, and I can only imagine what great wisdom you shared from your contexts with your various groups. Thank you so much, and I will reiterate the request that I made of Reverend Stacy, which is, if possible, can you record yourself sharing the information? Because today technology decided to do everything that it should not, which included not allowing the recording to take place once I left the room. And until we were able to realize that problem, we didn't have a stop measure in place. Again, thank you so very much. So we know now how to prepare worship. We know now how to prepare the Bible study. We know now how to preach. We have a great sense of what advocacy is. But some of us are saying, Okay, I am kind of familiar with issues like gender justice, and I think ish I know about Palestine, but how do I do that in the real and practical sense? And I would like to say to you, we thought you'd ask. We couldn't wait for you to ask. With us this afternoon, morning, evening, night, depending on where you are three presenters. We have Angie, who is going to speak to us from her context in Indonesia on how to help people with disabilities, living with disabilities, get the advocacy they need for their needs and their desires. Based on what she shared with us earlier today, we realize that disability isn't only always what we think we understand it to be, but we will allow her to tell us more. After Angie speaks, we are going to hear about climate and eco-justice, particularly in relation to water, from the Reverend Anna Veronica Fleischer, who is also a member of the Gender Justice Reference Group. And she will be sharing from her context primarily in Ecuador, but also as a member of the Ecumenical Water Network. She will be followed by, yes, you guessed it, we promised and we are delivering, Maria Lubat of Palestine. So you will have a Palestinian who is working in the conflict space speak to us from her wealth and knowledge. Presenters, welcome. You have approximately 15 minutes each to share. And so I invite Angie to start. Angie, will you need my assistance in the PowerPoint, or are you able to do it on your own?
Yes, please. Thank you. Okay. I will try to make it concise to 15 minutes. Um, we were talking about layers of barriers for persons with disabilities. This afternoon, I was really moved by Reverend Bakwana on his session. Speaking from experience of self-advocating for people with disabilities, which is that's where my position is as a person with disability, particularly women with disabilities. Living with a disability in a society where ableism is male dominated is we need a more persuasive action. We need a more persuasive kind of advocacy to make people not only starting to talk about what is disability, but more into a kind action to start the advocacy of bringing the rights of persons with disabilities in our daily day-to-day life, because living with disability is not only living in the moment, but it's also living with your surroundings, thinking that you are unable to do anything. Earlier, when I was joining the conversation and the preaching by Miss Reverend Lydia, as I was also saying in the previous session, is that living with disability, we have to be able to understand what is restricting people with disabilities, what is their barriers for people with disabilities to be taken part in the society, what is the barriers in churches that make people with disabilities unable to join, unable to participate, unable to be part, to be fully part of the church itself, because this needs not only persons with disabilities effort to advocate for themselves, but also the needs this needs a cooperate work together between reference and elderly of the church in the same perspective of bringing inclusion, of bringing the church to be a more inclusive society, not only for those able-bodied people, but for people with disabilities, people who are born with disabilities, people who become disability because of accidents, because of sickness, because of disaster, natural disaster, for example. Uh, because when we're talking about people with disabilities, women particularly, and those who live in a male dominated that thinks of only able-bodied people who can participate, who can be a reverend, for example, or become an elderly of the church, is where innovation stops. People who live with disabilities l- lives to innovate, because we tend to seek what can we do to make our life easy. And I think this is what I was saying before, is that this is where church as a community would make life easier for those at for most at risk group, for people who live with vulnerable situation, particularly people with disabilities, because people with disabilities, we are everywhere, we are intersectional, we are in, when we talk about poverty, there is part of populations that are people with disabilities. When we talk about gender, when we talk about children, when we talk about elderly, when we talk about climate change, when we talk about um, indigenous people. We are there, but not be seen. Because sometimes when we talk about gender, we forgot that when we talk about women, there is women with disabilities who face all those stigma, who face all those barriers, even triple to the barriers that women with non-disability. We talk about the limited access, the limited mobility, that even women who have limited mobility, that is happening with women with disabilities even more. And there are cases where people with disabilities, people who are born with disabilities, their family is the one who create those barriers. We are um, forced to live in our home. Even more smaller than home, we are forced to live in just a small room. Why this is happening? Because families think that people with disabilities, born with disabilities, is a sin, is an embarrassment. They are the fruit, they are the fruit of sin. We cannot take them out. We cannot take them to go to church because everything has to be perfect. And by I think this is also the chance, this is also the opportunity for churches to come together and start talking and start outreach for families who have children with disabilities. Earlier, we learned that there are some churches who start doing outreach and talking with the families who have children with disabilities, those who doesn't even make their birth certificate, and so the church is trying to get them to have baptism for family who have children with disabilities, because they are embarrassed to take their children to go to church. And this is, and I think this is an opportunity to for the church to look back into our interpretation of the Bible, into our traditions, into our liturgy. Have we do enough to include persons with disability in our liturgy? Have we do enough to include or to take stand to side with persons with disabilities in our interpretation? What is our what can we do to make our motive, as Miss Lydia, Reverend Lydia said, we have to investigate our motive. What can we do to make the context of the Bible relevant to the context of oppression that is faced by persons with disability, by women with disabilities who have limited access to not only of healthcare, but also to educations, but also to public services, including going to church. We cannot do that because during my work as an activist, developer, a development worker, and now as a politician as well, during my work with them with doing these issues, there's a lot of children with disabilities, particularly girls, who start when they start having their menstrual, they cannot go to school because there is no toilet for them. There is no accessible toilet. There is not enough clean water. And then when they start their period, people would the other children would start making bullying them because they cannot change their sanitary napkins, and so they have to stop to go to school because they don't want to get bullied for having their biological cycles. And this is so sad, and this is happening all over the world. And it is a very good opportunity today that we can talk about persons with disability who is having all this time being alone, not to mention that people with disabilities is also unable to report when they are experiencing, when they have become a victim of sexual violence, um, molested by their own family member. And and this from Indonesia alone, that I've been receiving reports every year about the numbers of women with disability who have become victims and not and unable to proceed into the law. And I think this is an opportunity for the churches. How do we look our congregation? Do we know them enough? Do we know how many people with disability in our church? If there is none people with disability in our church, we should be questioned, because at least 15% of the world population is living with disabilities. Where are they? They should be everywhere, at least 15%. And now I think the number has reached into 16 to 18%, with the rates of the climate change, with the rate of the social conflict, international conflict that is happening around us. The numbers of people with disabilities is keep increasing. The lack of nutrition that the new mother experiencing, and now the lack of nutrition would result into babies, into children that is also having lack of nutrition, born with the condition of stunting and other um, disability, and this create an evil circle that we need to start talking. What can we do to lessen the suffering that is happening around our community? Um, is it 15 minutes already? I don't want to take okay. So I think I will stop there. And if there is any question, feel free to give the questions both in chat room or maybe later during the session of questions and answering. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Angie. You are insisting that the people with disabilities, living with disabilities, are seen. And you are saying, regardless of what the disability is, let their voices be heard.
Yes.
No silenced and voiceless folk in this meeting. We have voice, we have agency, and we are going to amplify for the sake of others. For that's what advocacy is about. Thank you. So we now invite Reverend Fleischer. And at the end of the 3 presentations on issue-specific advocacy, we will open the space for Q&A. Reverend Fleischer, ready for you.
Thank you, Nikki. Thank you all. It's been wonderful to hear all of the experience and reflections that you are sharing. Thank you for that. Well, now I need to run to get only 15 minutes, so better let's begin. Well, inspired on the Matthew's passage which says, "The Father, the Lord of heaven and earth, have hidden these things from the wise and learned, and reveal them to little children. Today, I want to share the reflection, prophetic voices coming from the Pachamama. My reflection goes around the water crisis that we people of Latin America are facing, told from the perspective of indigenous peoples, trying to establish analogies between our Andean cosmovision and our faith, the Christianity, in order to find what link us, what identifies us in this common pilgrimage toward justice and peace. As many of us know, the Pachamama is more than one expression used by the Andean people to describe their lands, their environment. It expresses a particular cosmovision which involves all, an entire world where everything is connected and related to everything and to everyone. The Chilean theologian Juan Jacobo Tankara tells us that the Pachamama comes from two Quechua words. Pacha, which means a living interlace, time and space where life and history take place. Pacha is everything that exists in the universe, where all is connected, is the reality without bifurcations. While mama means mother, a very rich word with an enormous semantic weight, is who gives life, cares, protects, and feeds. Therefore, Pachamama for the Andean world is the principle of origin and preservation of life. It's important to remember that the Cordillera de los Andes is a range of mountains in South America that, beginning from the south, runs through Argentina, Chile, Peru, Bolivia, Ecuador, Colombia, and part of Venezuela at the north of the continent. Water supply of this big area comes mainly from these mountains, reaching and watering the entire territory of this Indian continent, including the Amazonia. Despite the fact that Latin America has the 65% of the world's fresh water, we are facing a crisis determined by ambition of certain groups of power, corporations that rule our world by the logic of consumer market, where not only water is a commodity, but the entire nature and even us human beings. All has a price, not value, only price. Economic systems have been established hierarchies between human beings. Therefore, in the pyramid of power, there will always exist dominators and dominated. In this frame, nature becomes only the big market where all those who hold the power are able to use it or even to destroy it. In this scenario, the prophetic voices of the indigenous people are raised to denounce the cause of our situation with a courage that is pregnant with the strength of their hope. And as prophets, they are announcing new ways of life. They are proposing changes and new strategies in order to overcome the multidimensional crisis that we are living. These proposals are part of the model of integrative relationships that embodies the good living or buen vivir that is proudly the framework of our Ecuadorian constitution, the first in the world to proclaim the rights of nature. So we can begin by making some questions around the quality of the relationship between us and those sacred constituent elements of the Pachamama, which is equivalent to pose the question of how we develop our relationships to the other and not only to our neighbor, but to all creation. In this regard, we are considering water as our pair. Is water for us the friend that runs beside us carrying life? Is water the sister to care and to protect? Is water for us a divine gift to honor? For some of us, these questions may sound childish, childish and naive, but for the more than 14 Aboriginal groups of Ecuador, the 76 diverse ethnic groups of Peru, or the 36 groups of indigenous of Bolivia, the 87 indigenous groups of Colombia, distributed in three principal ethnic groups, the 30 ethnic groups of Venezuela, the 14 in Argentina, 12 in Chile, and for the not contacted indigenous nations that yet exist in Brazil, Bolivia, Colombia, Paraguay, Peru, and Venezuela. Certainly, those are not silly questions because all of them consider seriously that water is not only a provider of life, but is life itself. She is alive and vital part of our oikos and not a simple commodity. By the way, and only as illustration, the Codis, one of the indigenous groups of Colombia, are warning us by a big campaign about the danger of our risky behavior against the Pachamama. They call themselves the elder brothers that need to tell us, the younger brothers, about that by affecting and destroying nature, we are destroying the creator force of life. A lot of people from all over the world are visiting them in order to hear their theories. The singular point is that the Kogis used to make an interesting ritual which is based on a lecture of water. Yes, they collect flowing water from his rivers and put in one little pot. Then they tell everyone that the water talks, warning us about the destruction of our Pachamama. They see in water our past, our present, and our future. They find in water the secrets and the mysteries of life. They see the water as the communicating vessel and a sacred bridge. For them, water is the big mother, and they become her guardians. They know that they are co-responsible for everything that happens in our planet. In fact, they have been deprived of all kind of selfishness in order to transmit the warning message. The ecological crisis, the water crisis, are the results of the crisis of social relationships. Only by reordering the quality of the relationships in the frame of ethics and justice, we can dream on the reordering of our Pachamama. The challenge is how to restore that required balance. What does the Bible have to tell us in this circumstance? Fortunately, we know that the biblical texts have the power to overcome its historical captivity. Therefore, the Word of God demands from us a permanent and contextualized reinterpretation in key of equity, freedom, and Christian ethics. I want to run quickly into a part of the scriptures that allows us to compare in some way the conditions of domination that the first Christian communities suffered under the power of the Roman Empire. We can find in the Pauline epistles the necessary understanding of how to deal with adverse social political conditions. Paul was the organic intellectual that built the builder and organizer of Christian communities that emerged right from the earth of the imperial powers. Those countercultural communities marched just as Jesus did, sharing a strong message that challenged the Pax Augusta and acting in consequence to his countercultural message. Those anti-hegemonic practices are until today the foundation of the Christian ethics. Let's have hope against all despair. If through Christ we were reconciled, we are called to seek for reconciliation with our neighbor and with all the creation. The question is, are we ready to be his witness, defending life in all its dimensions? At this point, I want to tell you that for the Ecuadorian Lutheran Church, all I just shared with you is the framework not only of our preaching, but of all our practices. Indeed, we are a community of faith totally involved in ecological initiatives oriented to find diverse ways to restore rivers. In the zones closer to Quito, the capital of Ecuador, there are one strong civil movement that once a month gets together in order to clean rivers for plastic and all kind of trash. We, as Lutheran Church, are always part of this effort. We advocacy for the rivers, and only a couple of months ago, we, as part of a group of civil organizations, won a judicial process against the municipality. Now, the municipality should promote public policies in order to protect our water sources. We are monitoring the implementation of this process. Ecuador is suffering the consequence of climate change, and we are facing very serious fires. Quito, my city, suffered a large fire in the populated area near the church. Apart from having gone to help the people of the neighborhood, we invited them to our church to show our solidarity, and we have committed to reforest together the area of the forest that was burned. We are a community of faith that preach through actions, far beyond the four walls of our church. My preaching, based in the liberation theology, is consistent with our objective as an inclusive church that knows that we are co-responsible in the defense and restoration of creation and the construction of the kingdom of God, here and now. Dear brothers and sisters, Jesus is invited us to be one in our pilgrimage toward justice and peace. Now is our change to decide if we, as church, will keep a conspirational and irritating silence, or if we will run together in unity of act and faith, honoring the Pachamama, honoring our Christian identity of followers of Jesus. Noam Chomsky says, the most developed countries are driving the world into a disaster, while the peoples that are considered primitive are trying to save the whole planet. Unless the rich countries learn from the indigenous, all we condemned to destruction. Because God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. God chose what is weak in the world to shame the strong. First Corinthians 1, chapter 1, verses 27. Thank you.
Thank you, Veronica. Reverend Veronica, you have challenged us. You took us to the Ecuadorian mountains with Pachamama. You taught us what it means. You helped us to see what the people were facing. And then you said to us, this is what happened when we started to move. You spoke of using the preaching moment. You spoke of community mobilization. And those are two ways in which we can advocate. Thank you so very much. Siblings, participants, if you have questions on issues related to water and how you might seek to do advocacy for water justice in your context, you are welcome to place it in the chat. As we can see, Maria is ready to speak to us about conflict and Christian women. Maria Lubat from Palestine and the Red Cross there, over to you.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and good evening. I'm honored to be here today to discuss issue-specific advocacy within the context of conflict, particularly as a Christian woman. Before I begin, I'd like to briefly introduce myself. As I mentioned, I'm a Christian woman, a Greek Palestinian, born and raised in the holy city of Jerusalem. My journey led me in 2015 to pursue a bachelor's degree in law in Cyprus. It's a small, beautiful island. And I fell in love too much with the island. I stayed there to pursue, my master's in international relations and European studies. Since 2015, I worked in various roles. And in September 2024, which was this September, I returned to Jerusalem to join the International Committee of the Red Cross. Outside my professional work, I serve on the World Council of Churches Central Committee and the Gender Justice Reference Group advocating for justice and equality. I can safely say that my experiences have shaped my understanding of advocacy, particularly the role of women in conflict zones as leaders and agents of change. This brings me to the topic of today's presentation, issue-specific advocacy, focusing on conflict and the role of Christian women in advocating for justice and standing up for the values that shape history. Let me move to the next slide. So, as we all know, and as we all need to understand, that advocacy is not a single action. It's a dynamic process that evolves over time and that might take several steps. It's a long-term commitment that requires a clear vision, a roadmap, starting with the end goal, and then setting a plan and backtracking, and a roadmap on how to get there. In conflict zones, advocacy must be rooted in strong moral principles and the commitment to justice, since advocacy takes on a particularly urgent role, and it seeks to address immediate needs while simultaneously working towards sustainable peace. In times of conflict, advocacy led by the marginalized segments of society, particularly women, is not an option among other ones, but rather an utmost priority because it describes the path forward and it builds hope. Women, both historically and in the present day, have been at the forefront of advocating for justice, peace, and human rights because they're the caretakers of the future generations and therefore have the biggest investment in the future. From a biblical perspective, we find inspiration in the story of Veronica, who wiped Jesus' face while he carried the cross. She exemplified courage, faith, and conviction, unafraid of the guards as she performed this act of kindness. Similarly, Mary Magdalene, who was also a woman, and the women who stood by Jesus during his crucifixion, were the first to witness his resurrection. Mary Magdalene, for instance, was not only a follower of Jesus, but she was also the first to witness and proclaim his resurrection. Her courage to speak out in a male-dominated society underscores the importance of amplifying voices of hope and truth in the face of adversity. The women who stood by Jesus during his crucifixion also played a vital role in proclaiming the good news, even in the face of societal and cultural barriers. Their courage and faithfulness exemplify how advocacy for truth and hope can emerge even in the darkest moments. Women were among the first Christians, and they were the ones that played a role we all recall with respect and utmost admiration. These women helped shape our Christian faith. Another example is Saint Helena, the first Christian empress and the mother of Emperor Constantine. And as an advocate of the early Christian church, she played a vital role in preserving its sacred sites and fostering the faith during the formative years. Her pilgrimage to the Holy Land, where she is believed to have discovered the true cross, reflects the dedication to both faith and justice in an era of transformation and conflict. St. Helena's leadership serves as an enduring model of how advocacy can bring faith and action, inspiring the systemic change that we need. Not to mention that she also built the Holy Church, the Holy Sepulchre, which is a special place and a dear place to all Christians all over the world. Coming to my context, the Middle East, women continue to lead and inspire through advocacy. Palestinian women have been instrumental in the grassroots efforts to preserve cultural identity, advocate for human rights, support their communities amidst conflict, and provide a vision for a way forward and a new reality based on justice. An example is a Palestinian woman, a Palestinian Christian, a peace activist, Sumaya Farhat Nasser, who was focused on nonviolent resistance and educating young people about conflict resolution. Her work with women's empowerment programs emphasizes the importance of education and dialogue in building a culture of peace. On a global level, women have also played pivotal roles in global conflicts. We cannot forget World War I and World War II. During World War I, women stepped into roles traditionally held by men, such as being factory workers, nurses, agricultural laborers. In World War II, women took even more broader roles, from working in munition factories to joining resistance movements. All these women endured a lot of hardships and discrimination, but they believed in the freedom for the whole society. Without the involvement of women, many advocacy efforts in conflict zones would lack the depth and the perspective necessary to bring about the meaningful change that we need. The contributions of women have consistently shaped movements and policies that influence the global landscape. And here we can see a picture of women rebelling against World War I. Advocacy is not just about raising awareness. It is about creating tangible outcomes that address the root causes of conflict. Issue-specific advocacy, in particular, allows us to focus on the critical areas such as humanitarian access, the protection of civilians, inclusion of the marginalized, especially in the decision-making processes, health, humanitarian needs. It is also through this targeted approach that advocacy can truly make a difference, even in the most challenging contexts. From a Christian perspective, advocacy is not just about speaking out. It is a calling to act in accordance with the values of justice, compassion, and mercy. Jesus spoke truth to power, and through him we know that it's the truth that is what sets us free. These principles are central to the teachings of Christ, who emphasized the importance of standing up for the oppressed, providing for the marginalized, extending love and care to those in need, and so on. As seen in his ministry, Jesus' life and actions serve as a model for how we as Christians are called to advocate for justice and peace all around the world. His direct engagement with society's most vulnerable, be it the poor, the sick, women, children, demonstrates how the true advocacy efforts arise from a place of love and the commitment to confronting justice, no matter how difficult the circumstances are. Advocacy in this context becomes an act of faith, a way to live out the gospel by addressing injustices and working towards a more equitable world. In short, advocacy is a Christian imperative. Now, we all know this quote from the Gospel of John: "Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." The biblical basis for advocacy is clearly reflected in the words of Jesus, who stated what we just read in the Gospel of John. This powerful message underscores the essence of Christian advocacy, standing for truth, especially in the face of oppression and injustice. The truth in this biblical sense is not an intellectual or factual understanding, but more of a moral and spiritual force that empowers individuals and communities. When we speak truth to power, especially in conflict zones, we are participating in God's work of justice and reconciliation. For those who advocate in conflict zones, this verse is a constant reminder that the pursuit of truth is integral to liberation, not just for the oppressed, but also for the advocates themselves. When we stand for truth, especially in environments where truth is manipulated or suppressed, we actually take part in a higher calling, one that transcends personal or political interests and aligns with God's desire for justice and freedom. Advocacy grounded in efforts and in truth offers a pathway to healing and a transformation because it allows people to acknowledge their suffering, recognize the underlying injustices, and work towards a better future. The words of Jesus give us the power to say the truth no matter what, and no matter how inconvenient it may seem to the oppressor, and irrespective of the power the oppressor holds against us. The realization is amazing that we can possess a tool that actually undermines injustice. Truth in this context of advocacy involves more than just revealing facts. It's about standing firm in the face of lies and distortions and propaganda that surrounds the conflicts. As Christians, we are called to expose these deceptions and advocate for the truth that liberates, heals, restores dignity, and takes care of the most affected by injustice. This is not always an easy path. This is not always the case because it requires a lot of courage to speak truth to power and to challenge the deeply ingrained systems of oppression. In my work, I found that Christian values provide a moral framework that informs and strengthens my approach to advocacy. These values are not just abstract principles, but practical guides for action. Justice, a core tenet of our faith, motivates me to stand up for fairness and equality, especially in situations where marginalized communities are at risk. Compassion fuels my desire to connect and support those affected by conflict, ensuring that my actions address the real needs. Mercy compels me to offer healing and hope, even in the midst of turmoil and conflict, working toward reconciliation and sustainable peace. As a woman and as a Christian in a conflict zone, I strive to live out these values through advocacy. My involvement with the World Council of Churches is one example of how I put my faith into action and how I stand up for justice. In this role, I contribute to efforts that support human rights, peace building, interfaith, and promote dialogue. The WCC's mission to address injustice and promote dignity of all people aligns deeply with my commitment to advocacy. I see my participation as a way to not only represent Christian values in the wider global community, but also to actively engage in shaping policies that affect vulnerable communities in conflict regions. In essence, I believe that Christian advocacy is not just a profession or a calling. It is a way of life that involves using one's voice and actions to confront injustice, promote peace, and uphold human dignity. As a woman and a Christian one in a conflict zone, I see it as my duty to live out these values every day, striving to make a seen difference in the world. In conclusion, there is an obvious need for advocacy in conflict zones, and we cannot reach its full potential if it includes only parts of society. If it excludes half of the population, particularly women, we cannot achieve that. It cannot reach its full potential if it excludes religious values and is seen merely as a political tool. Gender equity is not a mere aspiration, but a fundamental necessity in ensuring that the voices of all community members are heard, especially those that are marginalized. And in conflict situations, the perspectives and contributions of women are invaluable. They bring unique insights into the root causes of violence and the pathways to lasting peace. Women often serve as the bridge between divided communities, using their roles in families and local networks to foster dialogue, reconciliation, and healing. As a woman, and as women in general, we are uniquely positioned to lead and create lasting change in conflict zones. Our resilience, combined with our deep understanding of these challenges faced by communities, equip us to advocate for solutions that are both practical and transformative. My own experience as a Christian woman, both in humanitarian work and in advocating for justice through my role, has reinforced the crucial importance of women's leadership in advocacy. I have seen firsthand how empowering women, whether be it through education, participation in decision-making, or supporting their leadership roles, creates opportunities for not just immediate solutions, but for sustainable and long-term peace. Women's leadership is vital not only because of their unique perspective, but also because of their unwavering commitment to justice, compassion, and mercy. Those all are values that are deeply rooted in our Christian faith. In my own work, these values guide me to advocate for the marginalized communities. Christ's teachings on justice and peace resonate strongly in conflict situations, reminding me that advocacy is not just a means of addressing immediate needs. It's also an act of faith and moral responsibility. Through empowering women and ensuring that their participation is active in advocacy, we can move beyond surface level solutions and create more deep and more inclusive transformations. By amplifying our voices in peace-building processes and advocacy efforts, we're not only making processes and advocacy efforts and progress towards gender equity, but we're also fostering communities where justice, peace, and reconciliation can truly thrive.
Yes.
Ultimately, a gender equitable approach to advocacy is not just there, and it's not just a moral imperative, it's a strategic necessity. The contributions of women are indispensable to achieving lasting peace and justice in any conflict zone. It is by empowering us women to lead that we can lay the foundations for a stronger and more resilient society where all members, regardless of race, gender, age, can live with dignity and hope for a better future. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you so very much. And you.
Thank you, ma'am.
You have taken us through the course of history and invited us to see the necessity for women to be involved in advocacy, especially as peace builders and peacemakers within our communities. Colleagues, friends, siblings, all, we have 9 minutes to unpack these 3 critical areas and issues that have been raised: people with disability, climate, water justice, and conflict zones. I am going to ask you to raise your hand. You're going to keep the question or comment extremely brief. We'll take 2 to 3 questions at the first go. Maria will have a chance to respond, and then depending on whether we have extra time, we will continue with another round of questions. Is there anyone? Comfort, quickly.
I think I typed mine. I typed mine on the chat box. And my question is
involved advocacy in conflict zones.
The core risks.
Yes, thank you. And Rebecca asks, do you feel that the religious and gender aspects are being set aside because of the focus on the broader conflict? And again, what are the challenges that you face? How can we better support Palestinian women? Do you have practical advice for us to be more effective in our support?
Are we taking all the questions now, or do we just...
Now, and then I'll hop to Veronica and Angie, who has several questions on people with disability. Yes, we will have the notes from all the presenters, and we will also have the recording available. Maria, over to you.
To answer Comfort's question, what are the core risks involved in advocacy in conflict zones? There's often, Reverend Stacy mentioned it earlier, that there are a lot of risks. Yes, I agree. But one thing that we can do is allow the women to be heard, allow the women to say what they have, regardless of, being worried of the consequences. Most of the times, as a woman living in a conflict zone, We're often worried about what will happen if we share, if we post, if we say, what are the consequences that we will bear, that our families will bear. So one risk would be the consequences. Most women are scared to speak up, to say how they feel because of the consequences that not only they, but everyone around them can bear. So I would say this is the major risk that we're facing right now here, other than the direct and imminent risks that you all know about. I'm sorry, I'm reading the chats and speaking at the same time, looking at your facial expressions as well. So it's a bit overwhelming, but I hope I answered your question, Comfort, that the main risk is the consequences. We're often worried, and we have at the back of our head, what will happen if? So that's one way to answer your question. And
Thank you, Maria.
How can we accompany you? What are the main risks? You answered the risk question already, so let's go to the how can we accompany you?
hear us out. This is what Reverend Stacy said as well. Hear us out. Listen to our needs. Spend time with us. Support us throughout this journey, and be there for us. That's the simplest way I can put it.
Hear, listen, and amplify. Thank you, Maria. We move now to questions regarding people with disabilities. And Reverend Rebecca wants to know, how do I help my congregation to be more open to inclusion in spaces despite the use of liturgy, despite the biblical texts, despite my inclusion of persons? How do I help people with disabilities to be amplified in their presence in the congregational context? Angie, over to you.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Reverend Nikki. Thank you, Rebecca. That is a very good questions. I have tried to answer it on the chat box, but I think what is important is that we should have our allies at church as well. We should have our elderly, our church influencers, because sometimes, or most of the time, church have their own influencers, Be a member of church who have voices that been heard to other member of the church. The conversation should start of disability awareness, because sometimes or most of the times we have our understanding of disability, but not a lot of church members have the same understanding as we are, who perhaps already knows about disabilities. And I think to bring up this knowledge and why it is important for us to talk about it, because everyone prone to have disabilities, it's just a matter of time, whether it is by age, whether it is by situations, or something that we could never think about happened to us before, or whether it is by a disease, a stroke, or something else, or our family members. I think so. The importance of talking about disability and raising awareness within the church member itself, it is a work that is also need times for people to understand the importance of it. Yeah, so I guess talking about disability is always talking about humanity at first. Talking about disability is talking about the fear that we have that we will be in that positions, whether it's whether it is um something that we can something that we think that it's going to happen to us, whether it's in a present moment or in the future that we do not know of. But having disability and the fear, the insecure of our life, that we can become disabled, is something to make us think about how society will react with our condition when it's happened.
Thank you. Is there a burning question about climate justice and particularly in relation to water? One burning question going once. And so, friends, here we are at the end of a very intense 3 hours. This webinar, this advocacy training could not have been feasible without the core planning team comprising Sarah Spiker, Gloria Koymans, Walter Muniz, and myself. It could not have been possible without the support of the members of the Gender Justice Reference Group. But more so, it could not happen without you, our audience. I thanked the facilitators, and I remind us again, Reverend Pat, Reverend Colin, Reverend Stacy, Right Reverend Lydia, Angie, Maria, and Reverend Veronica. We thank you for the wealth of information you have shared. But we were 104 strong at our highest moment, and we have dipped, we have increased, we have had people return, we had people joining 5 minutes ago. I am telling you, there is proof that there is interest in us being advocates in church and society. I am confident that each of you would like to see more. I am confident that you all are wishing to have something like this happen in your local context. And guess what? It is possible. But it can only be possible if you reach out to us at media@wcc-coe.org, making a request for us to think through how you might do some of this. You also may wish to send a message to us at some point, also asking for more material. You can go on our website, oikoumene.org, and you can find quite a bit of material with resources on almost any area that you would seek to do advocacy for. Siblings, it has been a long haul, but I think it has been a rewarding time. There's much to think about. There is much work to be done. And the work of the church, the work of the World Council of Churches is impossible without you. It is you and us who come together to make that difference. For the word tells us a cord of 3 strings is not easily broken. Special thanks to Walter Muniz and Gloria Koymans for providing communication support for this second session. Special thanks again to our facilitators. I want to thank also the core staff, Chief Nissen, Mikey Roberts, Masiwa Gunda, Kenneth Matata, my boss, who approved this plan, Hermin Edimo, who is somewhere in the chat, thanking you all for all you have done to help us to make this a reality. Team, facilitators, colleagues, friends, siblings, let us pause as we go to God to close out the meeting as we started with prayer. And then I will invite us all to open our cameras and we will try to see if we can do a group photo. Let us pray. And so, God, we have come to the end of a wonderful day. We thank you for the time you have offered to us. We thank you for the way you have shaped and facilitated each session, for the people who gathered, for the people who facilitated, for the people whose minds came together to create this event. We give you thanks. And may we go out of here in the full knowledge that we have been equipped, in the knowledge that you have been present with us. And we pray, oh God, that your grace, your love, and your presence will be with us as we move forth to transform our worlds, a world of peace, a world of unity, a world where everyone has agency and representation, where the margins become part of the center and the center is opened to those on the margins. This we ask in the name of your holy and precious Son, Yeshua. Amen.